The transport ship landed on Andara Prime with a soft hum. Jake Morrison stepped out into the bright alien sun and squinted at the massive towers reaching up into the purple sky. He was 22 years old, wearing old jeans and a jacket that had seen better days. His backpack held everything he owned that mattered. To anyone watching, he looked like just another human student excited and nervous about studying so far from home. The spaceport was crowded with aliens of every shape and size. Jake watched a creature with 6 arms carrying luggage while something that looked like living crystal floated past him. He tried not to stare. His father had told him that humans were still new to this galactic community. They had to be careful. They had to be polite. A holographic arrow appeared in front of Jake, pointing toward the academy. The automated voice spoke in perfect English. "Welcome to Zenith Academy. Please follow the markers to Orientation Hall 7. Jake adjusted his backpack and started walking. The academy was even more impressive up close. Buildings made of materials he couldn't identify stretched across the landscape. Gardens with plants from 100 worlds created patches of color everywhere. Students laughed and talked in languages that hurt his ears. Nobody paid attention to the human walking among them. Nobody gave him a second look. That was exactly what Jake wanted. Far above the crowds, in a security office with walls made of screens, Commander Varix watched the new arrivals. He was hegemony intelligence, which meant his job was to notice things other people missed. And something about the human student bothered him. The way Jake moved was too smooth, too aware. Most students stumbled through their first day, overwhelmed by the new world. But this human walked like someone who had trained for combat. His eyes tracked potential threats. His posture stayed balanced and ready. "Run a background check on that human," Varix told his assistant, a young officer with green skin and too much confidence. The assistant tapped his console. "Jake Morrison, age 22, from Earth. Academic scholarship. Clean record. Nothing unusual, Commander." But Varix had survived 3 wars by trusting his instincts. Something was wrong here. "Flag him. I want daily reports." Across the galaxy on a fortress built into an asteroid, an old warrior named General Kale sat in his command chamber. He was reading messages from his spy network when one report made him freeze. His 4 eyes went wide, then narrowed with something that looked like fear. "Alert the others," Kyle said to his second officer. "Marcus Morrison's son has left Earth. After 15 years of hiding, the cub has entered the wider galaxy." The second officer's scales turned pale. "Should we warn the Galactic Council?" Kale laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Warn them? Tell them they let the son of humanity's greatest warlord walk freely among their students? The boy who watched his father conquer 47 star systems? No. Let's see what happens when the galaxy realizes who he is." Jake found his room in the student housing complex. It was small but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the central gardens. He unpacked slowly, putting away his few clothes and study materials. At the bottom of his backpack was a wooden box. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a single military medal, old and worn. His father had earned it during something called the Siege of Cronus III. Jake had been too young to remember that battle, but he'd heard the stories. 10,000 human soldiers had held off an army of 300,000 for 6 months. They'd won because his father had refused to surrender. Jake held the medal for a long moment. He remembered his father's words from the day he'd left Earth. "You're not me, son. You don't have to be what I was. But if the galaxy forces your hand, remember everything I taught you." He put the medal back in its box and hid it at the bottom of his closet. Tomorrow classes would start. Tomorrow, he would be just another student studying alien biology and interspecies relations. Tomorrow nobody would know his father's name. But in the dark corners of 100 worlds, old soldiers were checking their weapons. They were sending coded messages. They were remembering a name that had once made the galaxy tremble in fear. Morrison Jake ate dinner in the student cafeteria that night. The food was strange but edible. He sat alone at first, watching the other students and trying to understand their social patterns. Humans were social creatures, but these aliens had customs he didn't understand yet. A girl with silver skin and purple eyes sat down across from him. "You're the new human, right? I'm Lyra. Welcome to Zenith Academy." Jake smiled, grateful for the friendly face. "Thanks. I'm Jake. This place is amazing. It must be so different from Earth," Lyra said, her voice curious but kind. "I've never met a human before." Is it true your people only recently joined the galactic community? About 40 years ago, Jake said carefully. He left out the part about the war, the battles, the way his father had forced the entire galaxy to accept peace terms. We're still pretty new to everything out here. They talked for an hour about simple things. Earth customs, alien foods, the differences between their homeworlds. Lyra was easy to talk to, and Jake felt himself relaxing. Maybe this would work. Maybe he could just be a normal student. But in the security office, Commander Varix was still watching. His deep background search had finally broken through Earth's military files. What he found made his blood run cold. Jake Morrison, son of Marcus the Hammer Morrison, the man who had defeated every army sent against him. The human who had taught the galaxy that Earth was too dangerous to fight. The warrior who had forced the Galactic Council to beg for peace, and they had let his son enroll in their most prestigious academy. Varix immediately sent an emergency message to Council security. Within an hour, the Galactic Council was holding a secret meeting. Some wanted Jake removed immediately. Others argued he hadn't done anything wrong. The debate raged through the night. Jake slept peacefully in his small room, unaware of the chaos his presence had created. He dreamed of his father teaching him to fight, to think, to survive. He dreamed of a childhood spent learning tactics and strategy instead of playing games. He dreamed of the weight his father had carried, trying to protect humanity while the galaxy saw them only as monsters. When Jake woke the next morning, the sun was rising over Endara Prime. He got dressed and headed to his first class. He was just a student. Just a young man trying to learn, but the galaxy knew better. The galaxy remembered, and soon everyone would discover that Marcus Morrison's son had inherited more than just his father's name. He had inherited his father's gift for war. Jake's first week at Zenith Academy passed quietly. He attended lectures on galactic history and struggled through mathematics taught by a professor who could see in 17 dimensions. He made a few friends, including Lyra, who seemed genuinely interested in learning about Earth culture. Everything felt normal, and that made Jake nervous. Normal never lasted for people with his last name. In his xenobiology class, Jake sat near the back and took careful notes. The professor was explaining the reproductive cycles of silicon-based life forms when Jake noticed someone watching him. A student he didn't recognize, sitting 3 rows away, kept glancing in his direction. When Jake made eye contact, the student quickly looked away. It was starting. People were learning who he was. After class, Lyra caught up with him in the hallway. Want to study in the library? I'm terrible at remembering all these biological categories. Jake agreed, grateful for the distraction. The library was enormous, with sections for books and data crystals from thousands of worlds. They found a quiet corner and spread out their materials. Can I ask you something? Lyra said after they'd been studying for a while. Is it true your people only recently discovered faster-than-light travel? We didn't discover it, Jake said. We were discovered. First contact happened about 40 years ago when a survey ship found Earth. Things got complicated after that. He didn't mention the war. He didn't talk about how the galaxy had tried to quarantine humanity, treating them like a disease. He didn't explain how his father had been forced to fight because the aliens wouldn't accept peace. But Lyra was perceptive. You make it sound like it wasn't a happy discovery. It wasn't, but we worked it out eventually. Jake changed the subject. Tell me about Silthia. I've never seen a world with 3 moons. Across the library, Commander Varix sat disguised as a visiting professor. His species could change their appearance slightly, enough to blend in. He watched Jake carefully, noting every word, every gesture, every careful deflection. The background check had revealed everything. Jake Morrison had grown up on Earth during the aftermath of the war. His father had become a legend, the human who never lost a battle. But the files also showed something else. Jake had been trained from childhood, not just in combat but in tactics, strategy, and leadership. The boy was a weapon, even if he looked like a student. Varix sent another report to Council security. The response came quickly. Continue observation but take no action. The Council was divided on what to do about Jake Morrison. That evening, Varix received orders to run a deeper search. What he found made the situation worse. Jake's training hadn't been random. He'd been taught by some of the best military minds humanity had produced. He'd studied every major battle of the last century, including ones fought against the species now surrounding him at the Academy. And most troubling of all, every psychological evaluation suggested Jake had his father's tactical genius, maybe even surpassed it. In a bar in the lower districts of Andara Prime, a different kind of attention was focusing on Jake. A Crithian bounty hunter named Dax was drinking with some fellow criminals when he overheard interesting news. Morrison's kid is here. At the academy. Can you believe it? Dax turned around so fast he knocked over his drink. You're lying. The drunk pilot shook his head. Saw it on the shadow nets. Someone posted a bounty. 20,000 credits for the boy. Alive. 20,000 credits would set Dax up for a year. Maybe 2. And how hard could it be to grab one soft human student? He finished his drink and started planning. Jake was walking back to his dorm after a late study session when his instincts screamed danger. His father had trained him to trust that feeling. It had kept Marcus Morrison alive through a dozen battles. Jake altered his route, taking a longer path through better lit areas. But when he turned down a service corridor, thinking he'd lost whoever was following him, 3 figures stepped out of the shadows. Dax and 2 of his crew, all armed with plasma pistols. Easy now, human, Dax said, his hand resting on his weapon. We don't want to hurt you. Just come along quietly. Jake raised his hand slowly, his heart pounding. I think you have the wrong person. Oh, we have exactly the right person, Jake Morrison. Dax grinned, showing too many sharp teeth. Your daddy's name still means something in certain circles. Someone wants to meet you real bad. The words hung in the air. Jake felt something shift inside him. He'd tried to be just a student. He'd tried to leave his father's world behind. But the galaxy wouldn't let him. You should have stayed in that bar, Jake said quietly. What happened next took less than 5 seconds. Jake moved with speed and precision that shouldn't have been possible for a student. He struck the first attacker's hand, breaking fingers and sending the weapon flying. His elbow drove into Dax's stomach, leaving the bounty hunter gasping. A leg sweep dropped the third man onto the metal floor hard enough to knock him unconscious. Dax found himself on the ground with his own plasma pistol pressed against his head. Jake's hand was steady. His eyes were cold. Who sent you? Jake's voice had changed. This wasn't a student speaking anymore. Shadow posting, Dax wheezed, struggling to breathe. Anonymous contract. I swear I don't know who. Jake held him there for another moment, then released him and stepped back. The pistol disappeared into his jacket. Leave, don't come back. And tell everyone on the shadow nets that the next person who tries this won't walk away. The 3 mercenaries scrambled to their feet and ran. Jake stood alone in the corridor, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He'd hoped to leave that life behind. He'd hoped to be normal. But his father had been right. The galaxy wasn't going to let him forget who he was. Jake made it back to his room and locked the door. He sat on his bed for a long time, staring at the closet where his father's medal was hidden. He'd used skills that no civilian should have. He'd hurt people even if they deserved it. And worst of all, part of him had enjoyed it. The training had felt natural, right. News of the incident spread through the underground networks faster than light. By morning, every mercenary and bounty hunter in 3 sectors knew that Jake Morrison was not an easy target. Some backed off. Others became more interested. Commander Varix received the security report and called an emergency meeting with Academy officials. Jake was brought to the security office to give his statement. You're saying you defended yourself against 3 armed attackers? The Felthian security officer sounded skeptical. Yes, Jake said simply. And you have military training? Self-defense training. My father insisted. It was technically true, even if it left out most of the story. The officer stamped the report approved. Try to avoid dark corridors, Mr. Morrison. As Jake left the office, he found Lyra waiting for him. Her face showed concern. I heard what happened. Are you all right? I'm fine. Wrong place, wrong time. But Lyra studied him with those intelligent purple eyes. You're not like other humans I've met, Jake Morrison. They're usually more nervous this far from home, but you move like a soldier. Before Jake could respond, a new voice interrupted. Miss Lyra, Mr. Morrison, we need to talk. Dean Cartwright stood before them, the Academy's human administrator. Jake recognized the look on his face. He'd seen it on military officers his whole life. The dean knew something. In Cartwright's private office, the dean poured himself a drink without offering one to Jake. That was another bad sign. I'm going to be direct, Cartwright said. I know who your father is. And I know what you are. Jake said nothing. There was nothing to say. The council called me this morning. They want you gone, sent back to Earth on the next transport. They're afraid of you, Jake, afraid of what you represent. I haven't done anything wrong. No, you've done everything right. That's what scares them. Cartwright finally looked at him. A 22-year-old student just took down 3 armed mercenaries in seconds. That kind of skill doesn't come from weekend self-defense classes. Jake met his gaze. What do you want me to say? I want you to have a choice. Cartwright set down his glass. In 3 days, the Academy hosts the Centennial War Games. Students from across the galaxy compete in strategy simulations, combat exercises, and tactical challenges. Jake began to see where this was going. If you compete and lose, you'll be seen as just another student who got lucky in a street fight. The council will calm down, but if you win, you'll prove that the Morrison legacy is real. You'll become a political problem they can't ignore. And if I don't compete at all, they'll send you home anyway. You're too risky to keep here unless you prove you're harmless. Cartwright smiled grimly. It's a trap, obviously. Either lose publicly or win and confirm their worst fears. Jake stood and walked to the window. Students moved between buildings below, laughing and studying together. This was what he wanted. A normal life. But the galaxy wouldn't let him hide. I'll compete, Jake said quietly, and I'll show them exactly who I choose to be. The announcement went out the next morning. Jake Morrison, human exchange student, would be participating in the Centennial War Games. The reaction was immediate. Betting pools opened across 3 star systems. Old soldiers who had fought against Marcus Morrison watched the news feeds with grim interest. In warrior bars and military stations, people who remembered the war started talking. Jake spent the day before the games preparing. Not training, he'd been training his whole life. Instead, he studied his likely opponents and reviewed the game formats. His father had taught him an important lesson. Never show all your cards until you absolutely must. The night before the games, Jake received an unexpected visitor. Commander Varix appeared at his door in full military uniform. No more pretending to be a scholar. May I come in? Jake stepped aside and let him enter. Varix looked around the small room, his eyes pausing on the closet where Jake kept his father's medal. Could he sense it somehow? I want you to understand something, Mr. Morrison. I fought against your father during the Battle of Helion Ridge. My unit was ordered to break through his defensive line. Varix's voice was quiet. We lost 2,000 soldiers in 6 hours before we retreated. I know, Jake said. 3rd Hegemony Strike Force. You were the only unit that made it back. Varix nodded slowly. Your father could have pursued us, could have turned our retreat into a massacre, but he didn't. He let us withdraw with our wounded. The commander's voice softened. I've spent years trying to understand why. Why what? Why he showed mercy. Warriors don't do that. Warlords don't do that. But your father did. Varix turned to face Jake. I think he never wanted to be a warlord. He just wanted to protect his people and end the war. Every battle he fought was to make the galaxy accept peace. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow you'll step into an arena, and everyone will be watching to see if you're your father's son. They'll want to see a monster or a hero. Varix moved to the door. I'm here to tell you that whatever you choose to show them, make sure it's what you want to be, not what they expect. After Varix left, Jake sat in the darkness for a long time. He thought about his father, about legacy and choice, about the weight of a name. Tomorrow the galaxy would be watching, and Jake would have to decide who he really was. The Centennial Arena filled before dawn. Students packed the stands, excited to watch the competition. But beneath the noise was tension. Everyone knew this wasn't just about games. They'd come to see if a Morrison could live up to the legend. Jake stood in the competitor's staging area, checking his equipment. The war games used non-lethal weapons and holographic environments, but the tactical challenges were real. Teams of 5 would compete through 3 phases: strategic planning, field operations, and command decisions. Morrison, a hand extended toward him. Jake looked up to see a young woman with short blonde hair and sharp green eyes. I'm Katie Brooks. Looks like we're on the same team. Jake shook her hand, surprised. They assigned teams randomly?
Yep, lucky us, right?
Katie's grin was genuine. We've got you, me, a Pelthian named Vok, a Silthari called Mira, and some Tyrellian who goes by Blue. The rest of his team assembled gradually. Vok was massive and bear-like with strategic scores that topped the charts. Mira turned out to be Lyra's cousin. Blue was a towering insectoid with compound eyes that could process tactical data faster than most computers. So, Vok rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, we have the famous Morrison on our team. Should we just give up now? Jake couldn't tell if he was joking. I suggest we try to win instead. Blue's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. I like him. No false modesty. The first phase began with a holographic scenario, a hostage situation on a mining station. Each team had 30 minutes to develop a tactical plan and present it to the judges. Most teams would play it safe using standard textbook approaches. Jake gathered his team. All right, what are your initial thoughts? They discussed options for 10 minutes. Everyone contributed ideas. Jake mostly listened, asking occasional questions. Katie suggested splitting into 3 teams to create multiple entry points. Vok immediately pointed out the communication problems with that approach. Unless, Jake said quietly, we don't need real-time communication. Everyone looked at him. Show me the station layout again. Jake studied the hologram carefully. They expect us to coordinate 3 teams, which needs constant communication. Instead, we pre-plan exact timing. Each team operates independently on precise schedules. No communications to intercept or jam. Mira's eyes widened. That's incredibly risky. One team off by seconds and everything collapses. Yes, Jake agreed. That's why nobody does it. But if it works, we'll execute twice as fast as any other team. They spent the remaining time perfecting the plan. When they presented to the judges, the response was mixed. Some called it brilliant. Others said it was recklessly overconfident. But everyone agreed it was memorable. The afternoon brought field operations, live exercises in a holographic environment. Jake's team had to defend a strategic position against increasingly aggressive attacks. Their opponents were led by Zhen, a Voxian tactical prodigy and tournament favorite. As the exercise began, Jake took a position on their defensive perimeter, while Katie coordinated from the command post. The first assault came fast. Zhen's forces probed their defenses, testing for weaknesses. Jake directed his section to fall back gradually, making it look like they were losing. Morrison, what are you doing? Vok demanded over the comm system. We're giving up ground. Trust me, Jake replied calmly. Let them think we're weaker than we are. Zhen, watching from his command position, saw the humans' line buckling. He pressed the advantage, committing more forces to that sector. It was exactly what Jake wanted. Now, Jake said. The carefully positioned firing angles his section had been moving toward suddenly made sense. Zhen's advancing forces found themselves in a crossfire. Holographic weapons marked them as eliminated faster than they could retreat. But Jake had already moved to the next phase. Katie, execute Protocol 2. While Zhen scrambled to reorganize, Jake's team launched a counter-assault from an unexpected angle. Within minutes, they'd captured Zhen's command post and won the exercise. In the stands, Commander Varix leaned forward. He gave ground to create an opportunity. Classic Marcus Morrison strategy. Dean Cartwright nodded grimly beside him. The boy's been studying his father's battles. By evening, Jake's team had advanced to the final phase. So had Zhen's team, despite their earlier loss. The final challenge would be command decisions, a scenario where moral choices mattered as much as tactical ones. The scenario was brutal. A colony under attack, limited resources, impossible choices. Save the spaceport and preserve the escape route, or save the hospital full of civilians. Every decision had consequences that rippled through the simulation. As team leader, Jake had final say on major decisions. The scenario began and immediately everything went wrong. Enemy forces were larger than anticipated. Refugees flooded toward their position. Equipment failed. Everything that could go wrong did. We can't save everyone, Vok stated flatly. His tactical assessment was cold but accurate. We have to prioritize. Jake studied the holographic battlefield. His father's voice echoed in his memory. The hardest part of command isn't making the right choice. It's living with the fact that sometimes there are no right choices. Split our forces, Jake ordered. 3 groups. Vok, take the heavy equipment and hold the spaceport. Mira, coordinate civilian evacuation. Blue, you're with me. We're going to the hospital. That splits us too thin, Katie protested. Standard doctrine says never divide your forces like that. Standard doctrine assumes you can't trust your people to operate independently, Jake interrupted. I trust all of you, move. What followed was controlled chaos. Jake's team executed their roles perfectly, but the scenario kept throwing complications at them. Enemy forces adapted. Resources dwindled. The timer counted down. In the final minutes, Jake faced the scenario's true test. A choice between saving his team or completing the mission objectives. Most commanders would save their people. It was the moral choice. Jake looked at the holographic battlefield and made a different decision. All teams, continue mission priorities. Do not fall back to extract me. Jake, no. Katie shouted over the comm. We can still get you out. That's an order. Win this. He held the hospital alone for the final 2 minutes. His holographic avatar took hit after hit until it finally registered as eliminated, but his team completed all objectives. When the simulation ended, they'd achieved the highest score in tournament history, at the cost of their commander's simulated life. The arena fell completely silent. Jake removed his haptic suit and walked onto the presentation floor. The judges looked troubled as they conferred. Finally, Chief Judge Marathas spoke. Mr. Morrison, explain your final decision. Jake looked up at the thousands of watching faces. In command, you're responsible for everyone who depends on your success. If I'd pulled resources to save myself, civilians would have died. The mission would have failed. He paused. A good commander protects his people. A great commander knows when to sacrifice himself for something larger. Marathas nodded slowly. Your father would be proud. My father taught me that the hardest battles aren't against enemies. The victory celebration that night was strange. Jake's teammates were thrilled about winning, but there was something else in their eyes now. They'd seen him make impossible decisions. They'd watched him sacrifice himself without hesitation. They'd witnessed tactical brilliance that came from years of training most students never received. Jake slipped away from the party early. He found his way to the Academy's observation deck, where the city lights of Andara Prime spread below like stars. He needed to think, to process what he'd just done and what it meant. You're not much for celebrations. He turned to find Katie approaching with 2 cups of something hot and steaming. Thought you might be up here. You've got that look soldiers get after a battle. How would you know what soldiers look like? Jake asked, accepting the cup. My grandfather fought in the Outer Rim campaigns. I grew up around veterans. She stood beside him at the railing. I recognize the weight you're carrying. They watched the city in silence for a while. The hot drink tasted like cinnamon and something sweeter. Everyone thinks they know what it was like, Jake finally said, growing up as Marcus Morrison's son. They imagine war stories and tactical lessons. But you know what I remember most? My father coming home after negotiations failed, sitting at our kitchen table and crying because he'd have to go back to fighting. Katie listened without interrupting. He never wanted to be a warlord. He wanted to be a teacher. He used to say humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our ability to fight. It was our ability to adapt and learn. Jake's hands tightened on the cup. Then first contact happened, and the galaxy decided humans were too dangerous. They rejected every peace offer. So my father did the only thing he could. He proved we were too dangerous to keep fighting. He scared them into accepting peace, Katie said softly. He hated every second of it. And now here I am doing exactly what he did, showing strength because asking for acceptance didn't work. You had a choice, Katie pointed out. You could have thrown the games. Lost gracefully. They would have left you alone, would they? Jake shook his head. Someone already tried to kidnap me. Someone posted a bounty. The galaxy knows I'm here. If I'd shown weakness, it would have been open season. At least this way, I've made it clear there's a line nobody should cross. So what happens now? Before Jake could answer, his communicator buzzed. Dean Cartwright's voice came through. Mr. Morrison, report to the council chamber immediately. The walk to the council chamber felt longer than it was. Jake had never been inside before. The curved walls held screens showing representatives from hundreds of worlds. Floating pods contained alien dignitaries of every species, and in the center alone stood a platform for whoever was being judged. Jake stepped onto the platform. Ambassador Kreeth spoke first, his Voxian vocal cords making his words sound harsh. Mr. Morrison, your performance in the war games was remarkable. Troubling but remarkable. Thank you, Ambassador. That wasn't a compliment, Kreeth continued. You've demonstrated tactical abilities far beyond what any student should possess. This suggests extensive military training, which technically violates the Treaty of Earth's restrictions on raising child soldiers. Jake kept his face neutral. I received self-defense training from my father, which is legal under Earth law. Anything beyond that I learned on my own. High Marshal Torvin leaned forward in his pod. We're not here to debate legalities. You've become a symbol. Already old soldier networks are mobilizing. People who want nothing more than to see your father's war resume are celebrating your victory. I can't control what other people do. No, agreed Counselor Preeth, his shimmering scales reflecting light. But you can control what you do next. You have a choice, Jake Morrison. A holographic display activated, showing 2 paths forward. Option 1, Preeth continued. You return to Earth. Complete your education there away from galactic attention. We'll ensure no more bounties or kidnapping attempts. In exchange, you never leave Earth again. Your father's legacy ends with him. And option 2, the display shifted. You stay. Complete your education here, but with full transparency. Everyone knowing who and what you are. You become a public figure. Subject to scrutiny you can never escape. Your father's legacy continues through you. Jake looked at the assembled representatives. Dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, all waiting for his answer. All afraid of what he might become. There's a third option, he said quietly. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. I stay. I complete my education. But not as Marcus Morrison's son. Jake's voice grew stronger. I become who I choose to be. Maybe that includes military service someday. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I become a diplomat or a teacher or a scientist. But it's my choice, not yours, and not my father's legacy. That's not how legacy works, Torvin growled, isn't it? Jake met the High Marshal's gaze. My father spent his life trying to end a war so humanity could join something larger. He fought so his children wouldn't have to. If I let fear dictate my choices, if I hide or become what everyone expects, then he failed. And I won't let that be his legacy. The chamber fell silent. Representatives looked at each other, uncertain. Counselor Preeth spoke again. You're asking us to judge you on your actions, not your bloodline. I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm more than my father's name. Give me that opportunity. The council debated for hours. Jake waited in an anteroom with Dean Cartwright, who seemed almost amused by the situation. You know, the dean said, your father once told the council something similar. When they wanted to dictate surrender terms after the war, he refused. Said humanity would join as equals or not at all. How did that work out? They gave him what he wanted. Cartwright smiled. Turns out nobody likes being told what to do by someone who just beat them. You're more like him than you think. Just less violent about it. The decision came at midnight. The council had voted narrowly to accept Jake's proposal. He could stay at Zenith Academy and make his own path. But he would be monitored. Any sign of military ambitions, any indication he was following his father's warrior path, and he'd be sent home immediately. We're giving you a chance, Ambassador Creeth said when they delivered the verdict. Don't make us regret it. Jake returned to his room exhausted. The emotional weight of the day pressed down on him. He'd won the games. He'd faced the council. He'd bought himself time to figure out who he really was. But the hardest part was still ahead. He opened the wooden box and looked at his father's medal. The medal was tarnished with age, but the inscription was still clear. For valor beyond the call of duty. His father had earned this by holding an impossible position against impossible odds. He'd saved thousands of lives by refusing to give up. And then he'd come home and cried because he'd had to kill to do it. Jake put the medal away. His father had been a warrior because the galaxy forced him to be. Jake had a chance to be something different. He just had to figure out what that was. The next morning, news of the council's decision spread across campus. Reactions were mixed. Some students avoided Jake, wary of the Morrison name. Others treated him the same as before, judging him on his actions rather than his father's reputation. Lyra found him in the library that afternoon. I heard about the council meeting. How do you feel? Honestly, terrified. Jake closed his study tablet. Everyone's watching now, waiting to see if I'll become my father. Will you? No, but I understand why he did what he did. Jake looked out at students passing by. The galaxy wasn't ready for humanity. We were too good at war, too adaptable, too aggressive. So they tried to contain us, which made everything worse. And now I have to prove humanity can be more than warriors, that we can contribute without conquering, that my father's children can build instead of destroy. He smiled slightly. No pressure, right? Lyra laughed. When you put it that way, passing xenobiology seems easy. Jake spent the rest of the day trying to return to normal student life. He attended classes, studied in the library, even joined some classmates for dinner. But he could feel the weight of attention on him. People watched. People whispered. People wondered. That night, Commander Varix filed another report to Council Security. It read, "Subject behaving normally. No concerning activity. Recommend continued monitoring but reduced priority." But Varix had noticed something the Council hadn't. Jake Morrison wasn't avoiding his father's legacy. He was transforming it, the way he helped struggling classmates, the way he mediated disputes between student groups, the way he approached every challenge as a problem to solve together, rather than a battle to win alone. Marcus Morrison had taught the galaxy to fear humanity. His son was teaching them something different, something the galaxy desperately needed but didn't know how to ask for. Understanding, and maybe, just maybe, that was more dangerous than any warlord could ever be. 3 months passed since the war games. Jake settled into a routine that almost felt normal. Classes in the morning, study groups in the afternoon, occasional social events in the evening. He even joined an intramural gravity ball team, though his tactical approach to sports made his teammates both grateful and slightly uncomfortable. The media attention gradually faded. Other stories took over the news feeds. The galaxy found new things to worry about. Jake Morrison became just another student at Zenith Academy, which was exactly what he wanted. But beneath the surface, things were changing. It started small. A Keltharian student struggling with tactical theory asked Jake for help. He'd been afraid at first, worried that the famous Morrison would be arrogant or intimidating. Instead, Jake spent 2 hours patiently explaining concepts until they made sense. Word spread. More students started asking Jake for help, not because of his father's name, but because Jake was a good teacher. He had a way of breaking down complex ideas into simple parts. He never made anyone feel stupid for not understanding. Katie noticed it first. "You're collecting students like some kind of academic magnet," she said one afternoon as they studied together. Jake looked up from his datapad. Around their usual table in the library, 7 other students had gathered. 2 Veshtar, a Pelthian, 3 Silthari, and another human. They were all working on different subjects, but they'd all gravitated to Jake's study group. "I'm not collecting anyone," Jake protested. "No, but they're collecting around you," Katie pointed out. "And you know what's interesting? They're all from different species, different backgrounds. Some of their homeworlds don't even get along. But here they are studying together because you made them feel welcome." Jake hadn't thought about it that way. He'd just been helping people who asked for help. But Katie was right. His study group had become something bigger, a small community where species that usually kept to themselves were learning to work together. Lyra joined them with her own observation. "My cousin Mira says the same thing is happening in the combat training program. Students from rival species are partnering up because you showed them how to work together during the war games." "I didn't do anything special," Jake said, uncomfortable with the attention. "That's what makes it special," Lyra replied. "You treat everyone the same. Like people. Not like species or political symbols. Do you know how rare that is out here?" Jake was starting to understand. The galaxy was divided into factions and alliances, old grudges and ancient wars. Species that had fought each other for centuries maintained that hatred even in peacetime. But humans were new. They didn't have those old hatreds. They could see everyone as equals because they hadn't learned to hate yet. His father had used that to become a great warrior. Jake was using it to become something else. Not everyone appreciated what Jake was doing. In a secure meeting room in the council chambers, a group of ambassadors watched surveillance footage of Jake's study group with growing concern. "This is more dangerous than if he'd started a rebellion," Ambassador Torvin said, his voice tight. "He's creating unity where we've maintained necessary divisions for centuries." Councillor Praith disagreed. "Necessary divisions? You mean convenient hatreds that let us control our populations through fear of the other?" "You can't be naive enough to think this is good," Torvin snapped. "Morrison is eroding the social structures that keep the peace. What happens when species that have been enemies for millennia suddenly decide they have more in common than they thought?" "Maybe," Preeth said quietly. "They find better reasons to keep the peace than just fear." Commander Varix, present for his security report, added his perspective. The boy isn't building an army. He's building something potentially more powerful. He's building trust across species lines. Friendship, understanding. That's harder to fight than any military force. The debate continued, but no consensus emerged. Jake Morrison wasn't breaking any rules. He was just being himself. And that was somehow more threatening than if he'd tried to start a war. Jake was unaware of these political concerns. He was too busy dealing with immediate problems, like the fight that broke out between two students in his gravity ball team. Rax, an aggressive Crithian forward, had deliberately injured Chen, a human defender. The two species had a complicated history. During the First Contact War, Crithian mercenaries had fought against human forces. Old wounds ran deep. He deserved it, Rax snarled when Jake confronted him after practice. You humans think you own everything now. Coming to our galaxy, acting like you belong here. We were invited, Jake said calmly. And Chen didn't do anything to you except play better defense than you're used to. My grandfather died fighting your kind, Rax shot back. Don't tell me what I should feel. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my father killed a lot of people during the war. Some of them might have been your relatives. I can't change that. But I'm not my father. And Chen isn't the soldier who fought your grandfather. We're just students trying to play gravity ball. It's not that simple. It never is. Jake sat down on the bench, gesturing for Rax to join him. My father told me something once. He said the easiest thing in war is to hate the enemy. The hardest thing is to stop hating when the war ends. Because if you don't stop, the war never really ends. It just moves into your head and stays there forever. Rax sat down slowly. Your father said that? After the treaty was signed. He spent the rest of his life trying to make peace with the fact that he'd been so good at war. Jake looked at the Crithian. You can hate me if you want. You can hate Chen. But what does that accomplish? Your grandfather is still gone. The war is still over. The only thing that changes is whether you spend the rest of your life angry or whether you try to build something better. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Rax said, I'll apologize to Chen, not because you told me to, because maybe you're right. Maybe the war should actually end. Word of that conversation spread too. Students started bringing their conflicts to Jake instead of letting them fester. He became an unofficial mediator, helping species that had been enemies learn to communicate. Dean Cartwright watched this development with mixed feelings. On one hand, Jake was doing exactly what the galaxy needed. On the other hand, he was becoming influential in ways that made politicians nervous. You're building bridges, Cartwright told Jake during one of their regular meetings. That's admirable. But be careful. Some people prefer walls. Why? Jake asked. Because walls are easier to control. Bridges let people move freely, think freely, connect freely. That terrifies anyone whose power depends on keeping people divided. Jake thought about that. So I should stop? I didn't say that. Cartwright smiled. I'm saying be aware of what you're doing and why some people won't like it. Your father changed the galaxy through force. You're trying to change it through friendship. In some ways, that's more revolutionary. That evening, Jake stood on the observation deck again, looking out at the city. His study group had grown to 15 students. His gravity ball team had become one of the most integrated in the academy. Students from rival species were partnering on research projects because they'd met in his study group. He wasn't trying to start a movement. He was just being himself. But maybe that was enough. Katie found him there, as she often did. Thinking deep thoughts? Wondering if I'm doing the right thing, Jake admitted. Everyone keeps telling me I'm changing things, but I'm just trying to survive school without causing an intergalactic incident. You're doing more than surviving. Katie stood beside him. You're showing the galaxy what humanity can be. Not warriors, not conquerors, just people who see other people as people. That shouldn't be revolutionary, but it is. Katie looked out at the city. The galaxy has been fighting itself for so long that we forgot how to do anything else. Then humans showed up and everyone expected you to be just like us. Divided, suspicious, afraid, but you're not. Some of us are, Jake pointed out. Humanity isn't perfect. No, but you're new enough that you haven't learned to hate for the sake of hating. You haven't had time to build centuries of grudges, and that gives you a perspective the rest of us lost. Katie turned to him. Your father forced the galaxy to accept humanity through strength. You're making them want to accept you through friendship. Which do you think will last longer? Jake didn't have an answer, but as he looked out at the city, at students of 100 species moving through the streets together, he thought maybe Katie was right. His father had won the war. But winning the peace required different weapons: patience instead of force, understanding instead of fear, bridge building instead of wall construction, and maybe, just maybe, Jake Morrison was exactly the kind of warrior the galaxy needed now. One who fought with compassion instead of weapons. One who conquered hearts instead of territories. The galaxy had expected a warlord's heir. What they got was something far more dangerous to their old ways of thinking. They got someone who believed that yesterday's enemies could become tomorrow's friends. And slowly, student by student, friendship by friendship, Jake Morrison was proving that belief wasn't just naive optimism. It was a strategy that worked. Not through force or fear, but through the simple revolutionary act of treating everyone with respect. The galaxy was watching. And for the first 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison arrived at Zenith Academy. The young man who had tried to disappear into the crowd was now impossible to miss, though not for the reasons the galaxy had feared. His study groups had expanded into a full student organization called the Cross-Species Learning Initiative. What had started with 7 students now included over 200 from 40 different species. Jake sat in the organization's meeting room, listening to students debate their next project. A Veshitar named Crystal wanted to organize cultural exchange dinners. A Tyrellian called Blue suggested collaborative research programs. Katie proposed mentorship between upperclassmen and new students from rival species. "We should do all of it," Jake said when they asked his opinion. "But let's start with the cultural dinners. Food brings people together," Lyra laughed, spoken like a true human. "You think everything can be solved with a good meal? Can't it?" Jake grinned. "It's hard to hate someone after you've shared their family recipes." The first cultural dinner was a disaster. 3 different species had dietary requirements that were toxic to each other. The Keltharian dish was too hot for most species to eat. The Silthari cuisine looked like living plants, which horrified the carnivorous species. And the human food Chen prepared smelled so strange that several students left immediately, but everyone laughed about it. They told stories about their disasters. They learned about each other's worlds through food, and by the end of the evening, species that had arrived as strangers left as something close to friends. "You know what's crazy?" Chen said to Jake as they cleaned up. "My grandparents fought in the First Contact War. They have stories about combat and death and all this horrible stuff. But tonight I made dumplings with a Crithian whose grandfather probably fought against my grandparents. And we just talked about cooking techniques and spices." Jake nodded. "That's what peace actually looks like. Not politicians signing treaties. Just normal people doing normal things together. But not everyone was happy about these developments. In the shadows of the galaxy, in places where old soldiers gathered, Jake Morrison's name was spoken with different emotions. Some saw him as a betrayal of his father's legacy. Others saw him as something more dangerous than any warrior. General Kale, the old veteran who had first noticed Jake's arrival, held a secret meeting with other military leaders. They gathered in his fortress 12 species who rarely agreed on anything but were united in their concern. "The boy is dismantling everything," a Voxian admiral said. "Our troops see these students working together, and they start questioning why we maintain military alliances against each other." "He's making peace seem possible," Kale agreed. "That's more dangerous to the military-industrial complex than any weapon. If species actually trust each other, they don't need massive defense budgets. They don't need us, so what do we do?" a Pelthian general asked. "We can't attack him. He hasn't broken any laws, and his father's reputation protects him. Any military action against Marcus Morrison's son would unite humanity against us." Kale was silent for a long moment. "We do nothing, we watch, because the boy is about to face his real test, and I don't think he's ready for it." The test came from an unexpected direction. A political crisis erupted on the border between Crithian and Silthari space. A mining dispute escalated into military posturing. Ships moved to the border. Weapons were armed. War seemed inevitable. The crisis dominated the news for weeks. Students at Zenith Academy watched with growing concern. Many had family in the affected regions. The carefully built bridges between species started to crack under the pressure of renewed hostility. Jake watched his organization begin to fracture. Crithian students stopped coming to meetings. Silthari students formed their own groups. The dining hall, once full of mixed species tables, segregated back into ethnic clusters. "It's falling apart," Katie said one evening. They sat alone in the meeting room that had once been full. "Everything we built is collapsing because their governments can't get along." Jake stared at the empty chairs. "We can't stop a war. We're just students, so we give up?" "I didn't say that." Jake stood and walked to the window. "My father once told me that you can't control what governments do, but you can control what you do, and sometimes one person choosing to do the right thing can change everything. What are you going to do?" Jake turned to face her. "Something probably stupid. Want to help?" The next day, Jake and Katie stood outside the Crithian student dormitory. They were carrying signs and information packets. The signs read, "Our friendship matters more than their war." Rax, the Crithian gravity ball player, came out first. "Morrison, what are you doing?" "Reminding you that we're friends," Jake said simply, "and that your government's fight with the Silthari government has nothing to do with us." "Easy for you to say. You're not Crithian. You don't have family in the danger zone." "You're right. But I do have friends who are Crithian and friends who are Silthari, and I'm not going to let politicians destroy those friendships." Jake handed him a packet. "These are testimonials from every member of our organization. Crithian students talking about their Silthari friends, Silthari students talking about their Crithian friends. Real people, not political symbols." Rax read the packet slowly. His eyes widened. "You got my sister to write something?" "She's in the military." "She wrote about how your Silthari roommate helped you through exam stress, how he sent care packages from home, how he's more like family than an enemy." Jake's voice was steady. "War wants us to see each other as statistics, as threats, as others. We're here to remind everyone that we're people first." The demonstration grew. More students joined, carrying their own signs. "My friend is not my enemy. Species divides us, friendship unites us. We choose peace." The academy administration didn't know how to respond. Technically, the students weren't breaking any rules. They were just expressing their opinions. But those opinions were being broadcast across the galaxy. News outlets picked up the story. Social media exploded with debate. And in the military command centers on both sides of the border crisis, generals and admirals watched with growing concern. Their troops were seeing these images. Young people from their own species standing beside their supposed enemies, calling each other friends. It made pulling the trigger a lot harder. Dean Cartwright called Jake to his office. "Do you have any idea what you've started?" "A student demonstration?" "A movement." Cartwright showed him the news feeds. The protest had spread to other academies, to civilian populations, to military bases. People were sharing stories about friends from other species, about relationships that crossed political lines. "You're making it very hard for governments to justify this war." "Good," Jake said simply. "The military leadership is furious. They're calling for your expulsion, possibly your arrest." Cartwright's face was serious. "You've become a political problem again, Jake. Just when things had settled down." "I'm not trying to be political. I'm trying to keep my friends safe. I know. But sometimes those are the same thing." Cartwright sat back in his chair. "The council is meeting tomorrow to decide what to do with you. I wanted to warn you." That night, Jake stood on the observation deck for what might be the last time. If the council expelled him, he'd be sent back to Earth. All the friendships he'd built, all the bridges he'd constructed, would be left without him to maintain them. Lyra found him there. "I heard about the council meeting. News travels fast. Jake, whatever happens tomorrow, you should know something." Lyra's purple eyes were intense. "You changed things here. You changed me. I used to think humans were dangerous, that your father proved your species couldn't be trusted. But you proved something different. You proved that humans can be the best of us if we let them. I'm just one person. So was your father. And he changed the galaxy." Lyra smiled. "You're changing it too. Just in a different direction. A better direction." The council chamber was packed when Jake entered the next morning. Students filled the observation galleries. News crews broadcast the proceedings across multiple systems. Everyone wanted to see what would happen to the Warlord's heir who chose peace. Ambassador Creeth spoke first. "Mr. Morrison, you've created a significant political situation. Your demonstrations have complicated delicate negotiations. Some say you've interfered with governmental authority. I've exercised my right to free expression, Jake replied calmly. I didn't interfere with anything. I just reminded people that friendship exists across political lines. High Marshal Torvin leaned forward. You've undermined military morale, made soldiers question their orders. That's dangerous during a crisis. Making soldiers think about why they're fighting isn't dangerous, Jake said. It's necessary. Blind obedience to orders is how wars happen. Thoughtful consideration of whether those orders are right is how peace happens. The chamber erupted in argument. Some council members wanted Jake expelled immediately. Others defended his right to protest. The debate raged for hours. Finally, Councillor Preeth called for silence. We're missing the point. The question isn't whether Jake Morrison broke rules. The question is whether we want to live in a galaxy where expressing friendship across species lines is considered a crime. That's not what this is about, Torvin protested. Isn't it? Preeth's scales shimmered.